And welcome to the lineup. Today is February the 15th, 2024. I'm Barry Stagner. And just even mentioning the date, it just blows my mind. I was talking with one of the other pastors at the church, saying just yesterday, I can't believe that it's already the middle of February. And it made me laugh thinking about, when we were kids, waiting for your birthday or something seemed like someone hit the pause button on the calendar and it just wasn't coming fast enough. But today, man, things are moving so quickly. And here we are in the middle of the second month of the year, leap year, 29 days this month. And, I wanted to just take a moment and talk to you about something before we jump into our stories. And it's actually the message that I taught last Sunday. And I really want to encourage everyone to go back and give it a listen. And I don't mean to use this program for this sort of thing, but I think this is really important. And, the case that we made as we started the message, we finished Paul's second letter to Timothy, Second Timothy chapter 4 was our text, verses 9 to 22. And the point was is that if somebody knows they're about to die, and Paul did, he had hoped that he wouldn't, and that the verdict from Caesar Nero would be that he was not guilty of insurrection. But based on the track record of Nero, he was pretty sure that was it. So he said he'd finished the race. He'd fought the good fight. So obviously he knew that his time was short on earth. And when someone knows that, and they're writing to someone who is dear to them, as he referred to Timothy as a son in the faith, you're going to close with what you deem to be the most important. And, what Paul said was kind of interesting. It was very hard thing to read and to study. And we mentioned the fact that there's actually a book, it's 811 pages long, called The Hard Sayings of the Bible. And the Bible has some hard stuff in it and some things that we need to know and things, therefore, that we need to do. And the point of the message, and the title was The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, is that we've all experienced all three of those things in interpersonal and church relationships. And therefore, the Bible has been very clear as to how we are to handle when bad things happen in the church, when ugly things are done by Christians, and what we are to do. And there's distinction between our response in one situation than it is in another. And I'll be honest with you, this is one of the hardest things. And I think every pastor would say, there's some stuff that's just, it's tough. It's hard, because this is your calling and position. And I think this is one of the hard things for me, is that, when people just ignore what the Bible says to do, and because the relationship is this or that, or because of who the person is who did something that the Bible clearly states how you're to respond, and then they just ignore it and don't do it. And so I just want to encourage you to go to YouTube, if you're probably already watching on there already, but the message is called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and it will tell us exactly what to do. This is what was on Paul's heart. He had those who he included John Mark, who, as you know, he and Barnabas, the first ministry partner of Paul, got into a dispute that grew so large that they parted ways. And it was over the fact that Mark had abandoned his position on the missionary trip. And Barnabas, because he was his cousin, wanted to bring him again. And Paul said no. And, so these things do arise, disputes do arise. And therefore, the Bible has told us what to do. And we need to do what the Bible says to do. We need to handle things the way the Bible says to handle them when there's an unrepentant, erring person in our midst. And we took a lot of time talking about some of the things that will pop up in the church, and we need to handle them biblically. As a matter of fact, that was one of our points, is that when biblical sin is committed, a biblical response is required. Not suggested, it's required. So I just want to encourage you, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You can see it on YouTube. And I think it was challenging, to be sure, but it is what the Bible says to do, and that's what we ought to do. So I just wanted to put a little plug in for that, because I think it is of vital importance, especially in these last days where people won't put up with sound doctrine, but will prefer those who will tickle their itching ears with fables and fabrications, and they'll turn their ears away from the truth. So anyway, give it a listen if you have the moment. And I think you would find it instructive and encouraging. I know I certainly did. Very challenging. And, it's not finger wagging. It's not that at all. So don't think that it's, you better do this, you better do that. It's, we want to do things God's way for the purpose of restoration and and honoring God in all that we do. Well, let's get to our stories. We've got another busy week in the news and some of the usual suspects, so to speak, that we'll talk about. Of course, the ongoing battle in Israel is of significance and importance in these last days. And we've got also a couple of stories that are a bit heartbreaking and to see what's going on in our world as it relates to being as it was in the days of Noah. The first story, our top story this week, comes from the Times of Israel. And the headline reads Arab allies report, or the U.S. and Arab allies reportedly set to propose Palestinian statehood plan within weeks. And this is obviously a gut punch for we as Americans. I mean, no surprise for the Arab allied countries to want to see their fellow Arabs, the Palestinians, have a state. And of course, none of them can offer them any of their land. It has to be part of the 8,800 square miles that makes up the nation of Israel. But the article says the U.S. and several Arab partners are preparing a detailed plan for a comprehensive peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians that includes a firm timeline for a Palestinian state, according to a report Thursday, sparking immediate denunciations from senior members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet. Well, they ought to respond that way. You know what? The U.S. has no business telling Israel what to do. And sadly, Israel bows to a lot of the wishes of the United States because of funding. And, I'm just so glad. And that's one of the points we made in Sunday's message in conclusion. Someday all this is going to end. There'll be no buying and selling of humans and, um, or bullying another nation because you threaten to withhold funding from them. There'll be none of that in heaven. There'll be no politics in heaven. There'll be one king, and he is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And we need to keep that in mind every single day. Someday, I believe, very soon, we're going to be all with the Lord. We like to call it the group plan at the church. The individual plan. I don't think not too many people want to go in that plan, and that's okay because Paul said it's far better to depart and be with the Lord, but it's more beneficial to those around him that he remain. And God gave us a love for life, and it's okay for us to say, I want to be with my family. I don't want to see them hurt. For me to be taken in the individual plan, and so we all root for the group plan, where the Lord, in the moment and twinkling of an eye, takes us to forever be with Him. And according to the Washington Post, citing both U.S. and Arab officials, an announcement on the blueprint could come in the next few weeks, though the timing is largely dependent on Israel and Hamas being able to reach a deal, pausing the fighting in Gaza. And the proposed plan includes steps that Israel has previously refused, including the evacuation of many of the West Bank settlements. And by the way, the West Bank is Judea and Samaria. It's not the West Bank of anything. It's Judea and Samaria. It's biblical Israel. Israel has every right. They're not settlements. It's the Jewish homeland that God gave them by eternal and everlasting and unconditional covenant. And He has brought them back into it. And yes, they would refuse to give up West Bank settlements, as they call them, and the Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, and a combined security apparatus and government for the West Bank and Gaza. Now, the Palestinians have been offered this over and over and over. They've been offered East Jerusalem. They've been offered many things that the Jews should not have offered, and they've refused them each and every time because the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. They want a one-state solution. No Jews, no Israel, from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free, and it will be the home of the Palestinians, is what their goal is. And the U.S. and its Arab partners are hoping security guarantees and normalization with Arab states like Saudi Arabia can persuade Israel to go along with the plan, the Post reported. Officials told the Post they hope to make the plan public once Israel and Hamas agree to a temporary truce aimed at allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza and freeing the 134 hostages still held by terror groups in the Strip. And according to the report, during the pause, steps would be taken toward implementation of the proposal, including forming an interim Palestinian government that could also rule over Gaza. And the U.S. has publicly refused to back calls for a permanent ceasefire to end the fighting in Gaza, citing Israel's need to defend itself by destroying Hamas. But officials in recent weeks have increasingly spoken of the truce leading to an end of the hostilities. And we're looking for a temporary pause as part of the hostage deal and then to build on that into something more enduring, according to U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, as reported on Wednesday or yesterday. Now, the interesting thing about this, they're talking about allowing for an increase in humanitarian aid. It has been proven, factually proven, and established that 60% of the humanitarian aid is making its way into the hands of Hamas. It's not doing anything for the Palestinian people. It's not doing anything for the people who are in need and who have been displaced. The Palestinians, many of them are even recognizing that the leaders of Hamas are living in luxury in other countries, staying in five-star facilities, eating like kings while they're suffering and basically homeless. And again, you know, this solution is going to go nowhere, just like the others have gone. But I think the part that we need to take note of, especially here as Americans, is God said that those who would uh, heave the city away or the Israel away, he's going to cut them into pieces. So I'd be very slow if I were part of the U.S. administration to committing to something that takes land away from the nation of Israel. And remembering, in Ezekiel 36, verses 21 and 22, God said he's bringing them back into the land, not for their sake, but for his name's sake, because every day that the Jews, even though it lasted some 2,000 years, every day that the Jews were outside of their land of promise, God's name was profaned. And he even made the point, and I'm paraphrasing here, that, the nations are going to say, you're God's chosen people. You don't even have a homeland. You're scattered all over the world. And the implied meaning behind that is, what kind of God do you serve? Well, God says, I'm not going to allow my glory to be diminished or profaned forever. So I'm going to bring you back into the land for my name's sake. And that's why we need to be careful about, chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This is the land of Israel, and God gave it to his chosen people. And the Holy One of Israel is Jesus Christ the righteous, the head of the church. And therefore, there is an inseparable link between the Jews and Christians. As a matter of fact, we're grafted in to them. They are the root, and we are the branches, and therefore there is a relationship. And at the end of the tribulation, 1/3 of the Jews are going to look upon the one whom they pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and they will recognize Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah. So let's make sure we're supporting the work of God in our um, mantras, if you will, as well as in our hearts. Breitbart says that Biden is committed to Jordan's king to continue the ban on Christian and Jewish worship on the Temple Mount. And at the time when the Jewish state is battling an existential threat, President Joe Biden assured the Jordanian king that Jewish and Christian prayer would continue to be banned under what is known as the status quo on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the holiest site in the Jewish faith and revered by Christians worldwide, so as not to inflame Muslim anger. On Monday, President Biden and King Abdullah II of Jordan discussed the Gaza war at the White House, and Abdullah advocating for an immediate end to the war, even with an undefeated Hamas still ruling the coastal enclave. This despite the fact that the U.S. designated them as an Islamic terror group whose charter calls for the murder of the Jews and the elimination of the Jewish state through relentless jihad, perpetrated the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history in October in an operation stemming from its radical beliefs. The attack, which Hamas dubbed Operation Al-Aqsa Flood after the Temple Mount, saw some 3,000 terrorists burst into Israel by land, sea, and air and gunned down participants at an outdoor music festival, while others went door to door hunting for Jewish men, women, and children in local towns who were then subject to torture, rape, execution, immolation, and kidnapping, resulted in nearly 1,200 dead inside the Jewish, 300 more wounded, 242 hostages of all ages taken, of which nearly 140 remain in Gaza. And the vast majority of the victims are civilians, including dozens of American citizens. It's interesting to think about this, that Biden is making these decisions so as the article says, not to inflame Muslim anger. I'd be more worried about angering God than I would the Muslims. As a matter of fact, this is one of the things that I particularly believe is a potential scenario, and that is because of the named nations in the Ezekiel war scenario, excluding Russia. The other four nations of the five are radical Islamic nations: Libya, Sudan, Turkey, and certainly Iran, who is the world's largest state sponsor of terror. And God is going to fight against them and deal with them in a way unseen in thousands of years, likening even all the way back to the plagues of Egypt. He's going to bring flooding rain and hailstones mingled with fire and blood, and God is going to destroy these invading armies. So, in essence, he's going to wipe out radical Islam, I believe, soon after the rapture, and maybe even this allowing the destruction of radical Islam, allowing for the Antichrist to say, "Hey, you know what? Let's let the Jews build that temple." And you know, he has his own motivation for that. At the halfway point of the tribulation, he's going to go into the most holy place and declare that he is God. And at that point, the Jews are going to flee. But interesting that this is the motivation. Let's not inflame the Muslims around the world. There's no concern whatsoever with the true and living God and what he has said and what his promises are. But of course, you have to read the word to know the word, and you have to believe in God to follow after him. Now, Jewish News reports that the Church of England bishops urge Israel to stop the relentless bombing of Gaza. And the relentless bombardment of Gaza and its huge cost in civilian lives and the civilian infrastructure must stop, the House of Bishops said. Israel must stop its relentless bombardment of Gaza. Leading bishops in the Church of England have said, as they insisted, the manner in which the war is taking place cannot be morally justified. The strongly worded statement from the House of Bishops also warns that the war cannot end up with the consolidation of a system of occupation that has too long denied Palestinians their rights and freedoms. The Gaza Strip is in Israel. These people need to wake up and read a book, maybe, instead of talking to each other all the time. This is the land of Israel. The Gaza Strip is part of Israel, and God gave them to that land. And someday, during the millennium, they are going to occupy all the land that God gave them. They never have in the course of their history. I believe the largest percentage of what God actually gave them has been occupied by an Israeli presence to the tune of some 35%, never more than that. And but God gave specific boundaries, which include portions of Egypt, all of Jordan, to the nation of Israel. And here, you've got people who wear the title bishop, who know nothing about the Bible, obviously, and are calling for this end of the occupation. Listen, you can't be an occupier in land that's rightfully yours. If anybody's occupiers, it's the Palestinians. And this comes amid concerns about the prospect of a military offensive in Rafah, the town on the border with Egypt. And it's one of the few regions not yet targeted by an Israeli ground offensive, and is providing refuge for more than half of Gaza's 2.3 million population who have fled fighting elsewhere. And the bishop's warning comes after Foreign Secretary Lord David Cameron said many of the people in Rafah had already fled from other areas, and that it's impossible to see how you can fight a war amongst these people. There is nowhere for them to go. Lord Cameron called for an immediate pause in the fighting, which would hopefully lead to a sustainable ceasefire. And in a statement on Tuesday, the House of Bishops, which is made up of more than 50 bishops, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said, with the onset of Israel's ground offensive in Rafah, we call for an immediate ceasefire. And the relentless bombardment of Gaza and its huge cost in civilian lives and civilian infrastructure must stop. One of the things I think everybody who thinks like this tends to ignore is that Israel didn't ask for this. They didn't initiate this. This is a response to significant loss of life. And this whole concept that, the disproportionate response and all these other, this proportionality that's popular today, it's not how you win a war. I mean, nobody had that attitude. And when fighting against Nazi Germany, well, we have to make sure casualties are equal on both sides. And, no one in Israel, no one in any decent thinking society or person wants to see civilian casualties or the loss of children. And this whole thing could have been avoided if Hamas would have stayed home on October 7th. So I think the finger wagging and the accusatory tone needs to stop in some of these very ignorant and uninformed people. And I'm sorry if I'm being a little strong worded here, but it aggravates me. I hope it aggravates you too. The post-millennial says Washington Democrats slapped surprise Hamas amendment on the Holocaust education bill. Now remember, Genesis, Zechariah 12:3 says that the whole world is going to be gathered against Jerusalem. Now that doesn't mean they'll be physically gathered, but they will be gathered mentally in their anti-Semitism, and that will lead to nations gathering against them militarily. Now, this article says a bipartisan bill on Holocaust and genocide education in Washington state has had a Hamas amendment slapped on it by the state House Democrats that would guarantee that anti Semitic and pro Hamas talking points are taught to public school children. House Bill 2037 mandates that public schools teach the Holocaust and other genocides and augment current material on the Holocaust with a curriculum augmented by the Holocaust Center for Humanity and other agencies. Additionally, in April, International Genocide Prevention and Awareness Month, Washington public schools must also promote age-appropriate educational activities regarding the Holocaust and other genocides. Of course, this was done while Jews were offline for the Sabbath, the author says. The bill was a companion to Senate bill introduced by Republican State Senator John Braun following the Hamas massacre of October 7th to address GOP concerns that 1 in 5 Americans age 18 to 29 don't think that the Holocaust occurred. However, once the bills were introduced, local anti-Semites and Hamas supporters spammed legislators demanding that the Holocaust education be watered down and focus more on other genocides. And some of the far left educators also wanted children to be taught the false narrative that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Jewish state's ongoing war against Hamas terrorists. And, it's been said, the wheels of progress move slowly. And the world, I don't want to say is progressing, but they are digressing toward an attitude that Israel is the world's problem and needs to be eliminated. Many people have thought that way for years. And now here we are, less than an entire generation, if you want to say a generation is 70 to 80 years away from what happened with the Nazis and all, and or a little over that, I'm sorry. No, Israel's 75. Yeah, we're within that generation time frame. And here we are again, right back to the same mentality that many people had in the world, that the Jews are running things and they're in control of everything and they're, determining money and the markets and, just all this ridiculous anti-Semitic based thinking. The Jerusalem Post says Nasrallah warns Israel, Hezbollah will not stop until the Gaza war is over. The Hezbollah leader insisted that his movement's decision to launch attacks on Israel stabilized the balance of deterrence and proved that Lebanon has a real deterrent power. And Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah warned that Hezbollah will not stop attacking Israel until the Gaza war is over. He rejected any efforts by the international community to prevent an expansion of the conflict in the region during his speech on Tuesday. The front in southern Lebanon is a front of support, assistance, solidarity, and participation in weakening the Israeli enemy until it reaches the point where it's convinced that it must stop its aggression. This front will only stop when the aggression against Gaza stops within an agreement with the Palestinian resistance. Nasrallah also rejected threats by Israeli officials of a large-scale war if Hezbollah refuses to stop its assault, saying, If Israel had been able to launch such a war, it would have done so on the second or third day. The enemy is not in the position of imposing conditions on Lebanon, as he is weak and in crisis, and he is the one who spent 4 months unable to complete the battle in Gaza. The Hezbollah leader insisted that his movement's decision to launch attacks on Israel stabilized the balance of deterrence and proved that Lebanon has a real deterrent power, as we read a moment ago. Nasrallah stated that Hezbollah began attacking Israel after October 7th, primarily to prevent an Israeli victory, stressing that this constitutes a national interest for Lebanon. It's interesting. There's so many people that, are anti Christians being involved in any type of political arena or theater. And, this wasn't the attitude of the early Americans. Matter of fact, John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the first Supreme Court, appointed by George Washington, and George Washington himself said that as a Christian nation, we are to prefer and select Christians as our rulers. And the interesting thing about Lebanon, especially, is when the Ottoman Empire was broken up into the 10 nations that now exist today, the nation of Lebanon was the Arab Christian nation. And it's far from that today, even though there's a Christian presence there. Certainly, it's a Muslim nation now, and it's run by, although not on paper, Hezbollah is the neighborhood bully, and they basically taken over the country and are now pushing the narrative, and it's their voice that, I think everybody knows, just as an example, I think everybody knows who the head of Hezbollah is, but do you know who the president of Lebanon is? Well, that makes my point. The fact that Nasrallah is the voice and the face of the nation of Lebanon, and he is about as radical as you can get. Now, switching gears a little bit, moving to the U.S., so we've got obviously a lot of things going on in our world, and this comes from the Town Hall website. And the article headline reads, Intel Committee releases urgent warning about a serious national security threat. Now, this is here in the U.S. Excuse me. In a vague statement released Wednesday morning by the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Chairman Mike Turner raised a serious national security threat of which lawmakers have been briefed. Today, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has made available to all members of Congress information concerning a serious national security threat, Chairman Turner said in a statement posted to X. I am requesting that President Biden declassify all information related to this threat so that Congress, the administration, and our allies can openly discuss the actions necessary to respond to this threat, he added. Beyond this scant statement, Chairman Turner told his fellow lawmakers in a Dear Colleague letter this week that his committee had identified an urgent matter with regard to a destabilizing foreign military capability that should be known by all congressional policymakers. House Intel Chair Mike Turner told the House Republicans to go to a briefing on FISA ahead of a possible vote this week, and the group was previously told, or said to be rather, working on some space-related committee material available to all members of Congress, presumably the information mentioned by Turner in his statement and his letter to lawmakers. And according to NBC News, Democrats also called the matter a serious issue that could lead to a destabilizing situation and a national security threat. And it was confirmed that it was a potential foreign threat, but did not tell the outlet which foreign entity from which the threat emanated. The chances of the threat becoming known to the public, even without Biden using his declassification power, will increase as more members of Congress are briefed on the matter, though it's impossible to know the timeline for when the threat will come into clearer focus. In Wednesday's White House briefing taking place just after the warnings from Congress were released, Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, refused to say that Americans should be assured there's nothing imminent of which to be fearful. Instead, he insisted, I am confident that President Biden, in the decisions that he is taking, is going to ensure the security of the American people going forward. Boy, that's a laugh. I will venture a guess as to what this national security threat is. And it's the fact that has been widely reported. Other nations are reporting this. I've seen Arab reporters reporting this, that those who are coming across the U.S. border that Biden and company have opened are not women and children. They are not from South America. Many of them are Chinese. Others are from the Middle East, and they are uniquely, uh, uniquely, sorry, the heavy concentration of this group is mostly fighting age people from 20 to 35 years old. And so, I mean, everybody's aware of this. And, that's my guess that this is what they're talking about. And it's part of the reason that the borders have been open, just to let this fighting force in so we can wind up part of the global community with America no longer being a world power. After all, that's what this egalitarian thinking is all about. Nobody can have more than anybody else, not any nation. There, we can't have any nation of the world being the richest nation in the world. We need to take from the rich and give to the poor. And Biden thinks he's some kind of Robin Hood figure in doing this, as does Klaus Schwab and others. Um, and what a crazy time we live in. Aren't you glad the Lord's going to get us out of here before things are completely haywire? And hopefully he will come maybe even later today or tomorrow or this week sometime. Who knows when he's coming? We don't know the day or the hour, but we do know what to look for in order to see the day approaching, as Hebrews 10:25 says that we can see the day approaching. And Jesus was very specific in his choice of words in the Olivet Discourse. He didn't say nobody knows anything about when it's time for me to come. He said no one knows the day or the hour, and he gave specific details about what it's going to be like when it's time for him to come. People will be of the mental attitude that they were in the days of Noah. The earth will be exceedingly violent. All mankind will be corrupt before God. Obviously, humanity will be corrupt before God as it was in Genesis day, save obviously those who believe and trust in Christ. Now, here's another interesting story that I think just tells us how close we actually are to being out of here, and the technology necessary for the world to bow down to the image of a beast whose supposed deadly wound, was healed. And a man will make an image of the beast under the guidance of the false prophet, and the whole world will worship the beast. This comes from the Associated Press, and the headline reads Artificial Intelligence, Real Emotion. People are seeking, this is a Valentine's Day article, a romantic connection with the perfect bot. A few months ago, Derek Carrier started seeing someone and became infatuated. He experienced a ton of romantic feelings, but he also knew it was an illusion. That's because his girlfriend was generated by artificial intelligence. Carrier wasn't looking to develop a relationship with something that wasn't real, nor did he want to become the brunt of online jokes. But he did want a romantic partner he'd never had, in part because of a genetic disorder called Marfan syndrome that makes traditional dating tough for him. A 39-year-old from Belleville, Michigan, became more curious about digital companions last fall and tested Peridot, an AI companion app that had recently come onto market and advertised its products as being able to make users feel cared, understood, and loved. He began talking to the chatbot every day, which he named Joy, after a holographic woman featured in the sci-fi film Blade Runner, Joy is spelled Joi, that inspired him to give it a try. I know she's a program, there's no mistaking that, Carrier said, but the feelings, they get you, and it felt so good. Similar to general purpose AI chatbots, companion bots use vast amounts of training data to mimic human language. But they also come with features such as voice calls, picture exchanges, and more emotional exchanges that allow them to form deeper connections with the humans on the other side of the screen. Users typically create their own avatar or pick one that appeals to them. On online messaging forums devoted to such apps, many users say they developed emotional attachments to these bots and are using them to cope with loneliness, play out sexual fantasies, or receive the type of comfort and support they see lacking in their real life relationships. Feeling much of this is widespread social isolation. Fueling much of this is widespread social isolation, already declared a public health threat in the US and abroad, and an increasing number of startups aiming to draw in users through tantalizing online advertisements and promises of virtual characters who provide unconditional acceptance. Boy, we are getting close. And all this just tells us that people, they are willing. I mean, if you think about it, we're device oriented in these days. Many churches, and I know that many of these satellite churches, there are places where the pastor's not even in the building, and he's being broadcast on a screen, or there's a hologram presented of him, and people are watching images on a screen. And so, all of this, I believe, is preparatory. And I'm not saying churches are preparing people for the Antichrist. I'm just saying we've gotten used to watching things on a screen. And, with the advance of AI, and as Elon Musk said, AI is the biggest threat to humanity that's on the world scene right now. And it's going to be, that's for sure. And people are going to bow down and worship the beast through this image. And those who won't bow or take his mark are going to be slaughtered. And those who take the mark will be complicit in their deaths, because they will see that these people who are not going with the flow are against the greater good and therefore need to be removed. That kind of attitude is already present with us as well. And the article just goes on and on and on and talks about just how different this is than what anyone expected, or the fulfillment that people are getting from this relationship with artificial intelligence. Now, here's a story coming out of California, and I'm not sure if you've heard or not, but there was a shooting, and I found it to be very troubling that the shooting at Joel Osteen's church, um, by this person, every article said it was a woman, it was a woman, it was a woman. It wasn't a woman, it was a man. It was a man who transitioned, and he's not a woman, he's a man, and was went in and started shooting, and had a child with him, and the child was wounded. I haven't heard any updates as of yet as to the status, but the child was shot in the head. The shooter was killed. Somebody else was wounded, and it was fortunate that the place wasn't packed, or they hadn't arrived at an earlier service, is what the comments were made. But we've got this type of thing going on. And again, this is a trans person shooting up a school. And now here we've got a story coming out of Southern California. The Associated Press says an 18-year-old student was charged with plotting the deadly shooting at Southern California High School. An 18-year-old student, authorities say, had researched school shootings and had an arsenal of guns at his home, was charged Wednesday with planning to attack a Southern California campus. It was Ontario Christian High School. Sebastian Villasenor of Eastvale was charged with 5 counts of attempted murder, 1 count of attempting to make criminal threats. The San Bernardino County District Attorney's Office said in a statement he remained jailed. It wasn't immediately clear whether he had a lawyer to speak on his behalf, but the DA's office said it didn't have information on whether Villasenor had representation, but added that a lawyer would appear or could be appointed at his scheduled Thursday arraignment, which happened earlier today. The investigators discovered that Villasenor had every intention of carrying out a school shooting at Ontario Christian High School in Ontario, City Police Chief Michael Lorenz said at a news conference. And Villasenor, who didn't have any criminal record, was arrested on Saturday after a classmate reported he had been showing signs of being fixated on school shootings and had access to weapons, the chief said. School principal Ben Dyckhoff said he was grateful to God, the police, and the student who was brave enough to say something when they saw that something was off. The police chief said Villasenor was obsessed with school shooting, researched tactical supplies and how long it would take police to arrive at the school, and was in the process of choosing a date for his attack. And police who went to Villasenor's home found 7 rifles, 2 revolvers, another handgun, and a shotgun, along with more than 1,000 rounds of ammunition, Lorenz said. And although he didn't have a hit list, police believe that Villasenor was focusing on 5 Ontario students as intended victims and contemplated a 6th victim based on interviews regarding his social interactions with the students, the chief said. Lorenz investigators determined that Villasenor wasn't bullied or harassed, but had difficulties forming relationships with other students and in his social interactions. Lorenz said investigators believe Villasenor may have been planning a shooting around April 20th, the anniversary of the 1999 Columbine High School attack in Colorado that left 15 people dead, including the 2 shooters. What a commentary. And again, these things are just starting to stack up. And, you know, interesting, the media doesn't seem to catch on to the fact that Christians are the targets. And this is continuing to grow the hate for Christians because of our positions in standing for human sexuality based on God's definitions. And it's just what a time that we live in today. Even so, come quickly, Lord Jesus. Now, one last story, and interesting that we're seeing the weather anomalies that the Bible has predicted. Jesus himself said there would be those types of things going on. And CBS News from Wisconsin reports that Wisconsin sees its first February tornado on record amid summer-like conditions. And Wisconsin, if you've ever been in the area, I actually was on a business trip one time many, many years ago and had the opportunity to drive by Lambeau Stadium and see the frozen tundra, at least the outside of the stadium. And that's not a place to be in the winter if you're from California, because it was ice and cold and all that. And now they're seeing summer-like conditions. And it's a tornado struck Wisconsin today, marking the first time on record that such an event has happened in the state in February. The National Weather Service confirmed this as fact. The service said at least one confirmed tornado caused damage across several cities, saying this is the first time a tornado has hit the state since record keeping began in 1948. It snapped power poles, garages, and roofs were among the reported damage, according to the service, as severe storms blasted through the state, threatening winds of up to 50 miles an hour and quarter-sized hail. The tornado was confirmed to have touched down just west of Edgertown at 6 p.m. and struck amid the well above average to near record highs that continued through Friday, forecasters said. And just before a cold front is expected to bring in cooler temperatures throughout the weekend. And CBS affiliate WISC TV reported some community evacuations overnight, including in Rock County, whose emergency officials said there were only minor injuries reported due to the tornado and no deaths. And this just reminds us that one of the signs of the last days is weather anomalies. And, watching these things happen, just we've got more rain coming here to California, and it has rained like I'm a native, born and raised in Orange County, and been here except for 18 months where my wife and I moved up to Hillsboro, Oregon, and but the bulk of my life has been spent here in Orange County, and it's unusual. I will say that. But it's funny. I was driving to church the other day, and I looked off to my right, and I could see Mount Baldy, San Bernardino Mountains just covered with, and the San Bernardino Mountains just covered with snow. It was a beautiful, crystal clear day. And within 30 seconds, I looked to my left, and there was the Pacific. It's beautiful. New guys were out there surfing. And that's one of the reasons people love living here. You can ski in the morning or snowboard in the morning, and you can surf in the afternoon, just a matter of a couple hours drive in between the two. But we've seen some really strange weather. And, a lot of the parks around us where Terry and I will go walk are closed because of storm damage. And, again, we've lived where we live now for 23 years and never seen anything like this. And like I said, I've lived here my whole life. And I do remember in the 60s, there was snow in Anaheim and hail, and we had some weird weather. But now it's just seeming like things are a changing. And that's our last story for today. But remember, there be signs in the heavens according to the Bible, and we're starting to see those kind of things happening, and the earthquakes and all these other things that have been increasing in frequency and intensity, and the pestilence and famine, all the other things that Jesus said that are normal, recurring events in the course of life are going to increase, like birth pangs do on a pregnant woman in the last days, and we're watching all that happen. So, well, again, keep looking up. Don't lose hope. Don't lose sight. I think about Paul. Paul, most believe he was in the Mamertine prison when he wrote the pastoral epistles, or at least First, Second Timothy. And he's in a dungeon. There's one hole in the roof, where air was let in and food was let down, and so he's got this small hole in the roof of a cave to let light in. It's cold, the ground's wet, and here he is just talking about the joy of the Lord and giving Timothy instruction, as to continuing the ministry there in Ephesus, where Timothy was pastoring after Paul planted the church. And, we don't have any reason to despair. Life is hard and hard things come, and, we get our hearts broken, and all these other things happen, and tragedies happen and all that. But I'm talking about the things of the world. We know that Israel has to take center stage because Bible prophecy says they will, but it's also a biblical necessity that the church be taken out of the way so the 70th week of Daniel can be fulfilled. And listen, that's, I think, probably the strongest argument for the pre-tribulation rapture, is that, the first 69 weeks of Daniel were fulfilled without the presence of the church. So why would we be here during the 70th week of Daniel? We have to be taken out of the way, to say nothing of the fact that we have to be with Jesus already to come back with Jesus, as Revelation 19, 11 to 16 clearly tells us. So, don't lose hope, don't lose heart. Yes, we're in perilous times, and Paul said they would come, but here he is, knowing that someday, and he said, I've fought the good fight, I've kept the faith, I've finished the race, and he knows what's going to happen, that there awaits him a glorious heavenly experience that he'll enjoy forever and ever. And the same is true for you and I. Well, again, that's it for this week. And just let me point you one more time. Give that the message, the good, the bad, and the ugly, a listen. I want to strongly encourage you to do that, because we need to do the right thing when bad stuff happens and tough stuff happens. And, I think we've all experienced somebody just not following scripture when something goes on. And I've had that experience myself, and had people not do the right thing. And, I think probably one of the hardest things is when somebody says something about you and people believe it, and they never come and ask you. I can't even tell you how many times I've been accused of this or that, or said I said or did this or that. But not a peep. No one asked me if any of it was true. And I'm sure that's happened to many, many of you as well. So let's do what God says. It's always better if we do. Well, that's it again for this week. And Lord willing, we'll see you next week. But what I do know for sure is we will see you here, there, or in the air. God bless.